Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
New Mexico Territory, December 1882, nightfall. The wind had been getting worse since early evening, coming in from the north with a sharpness that bit through thick wool and settled deep into the bones. Snow, hard and dry, drifted sideways across the ridge like smoke. The sky, long since black, pressed down low and heavy, and the cold inside Gideon Hale's chest felt no different than the cold on the outside. The fire was holding, just barely. He'd stacked pine logs in the stove, the dry ones from the back of the shed, and now the iron belly of it glowed red. His hands, calloused and stiff, worked slowly, no hurry, no waste. He had a pattern for winter nights. Heat, cook, clean, sharpen, check the door, load the rifle, sit, nothing more. The cabin was simple. One room, walls thick with packed mud between pine logs. A single narrow window, a cot in the corner, not made. A chair beside the fire, another by the door. Table, basin, stove. One extra blanket. No decorations. No pictures. Nothing that needed remembering. He was 38, worn down by years of riding, fighting, and being left behind. Former Army scout. 2 years spent in territory campaigns that ended in mass graves and finger-pointing. Discharged after a failed mission in Utah, where he was the only one who came back. He hadn't asked for discharge. They just stopped sending orders. Stopped answering letters. That was 5 years ago. He came here because nobody else wanted the land. Dry in summer. Frozen in winter. Too far from town. Too close to old Apache trails. That suited him. He didn't want neighbors. And he didn't want to be near a church, a saloon, or another man's pity. He bought a mule, built fences, and survived. That was enough. Until tonight. At first, he thought it was the wind, a change in rhythm. But then came another sound. Not steady like knocking. Not sharp like a boot. More like something weak, a dragging. Then a dull thump. He was on his feet before he knew it. Instinct wired from years of listening for trouble. Hand to the rifle. But he didn't lift it. He moved slow to the door and pressed his shoulder against it. Listened. Waited. Silence. Then, again, scratching. Not on wood. On the frozen step just outside. He unbolted the door. What he saw stopped him cold. A woman. Kneeling. Collapsed more than upright. Barefoot. Skin blotched red and purple from exposure. Her dress, deerskin, Apache make, was torn at the shoulder and hem, soaked through from snowmelt. Bits of beadwork clung to the strands where tassels had been ripped away. Her hair was wet and clumped in long black strands. Some stuck to her face, some hanging loose. Her arms shook under her own weight. Her eyes met his. They didn't plead. Not at first. They just locked onto his face like she was trying to decide if he was going to hit her or let her speak. Then her lips parted. "I can serve," she said, voice hoarse and broken from cold. "If you want. Just not outside." It wasn't seductive. It wasn't even clear. It was survival. Gideon felt it before he thought it. A pressure in his chest. Not pity. Not desire. Something else. Recognition. She wasn't trying to trick him. She wasn't trying to gain anything. She just didn't want to die. He didn't speak. Just stepped back and opened the door fully. She blinked in disbelief, and then her arms gave out. Her body dropped forward onto the wood floor just inside. She didn't scream, just hit the floor with a dull sound, like wet cloth, and curled into herself. He shut the door fast. The cold air inside dropped 5 degrees in the space of 3 breaths. He dropped to his knees beside her. She flinched when he reached for her shoulder. "Easy," he said. His voice sounded rough, even to his own ears. He hadn't used it much lately. "I ain't gonna hurt you." She didn't respond. She didn't look at him, just curled tighter. He slid his arms under her carefully, lifting her toward the fire. She was light, but stiff with cold. Her feet were like stone. Her skin burned with frost. And when his fingers touched the bare side of her waist where the dress had torn, he felt raised welts and bruises beneath the dirt and beadwork. He didn't speak again. He laid her on a folded horse blanket near the stove, far enough not to burn, close enough to warm. She stirred. Her eyes moved to the fire. "Please," she whispered again. "You can have me. I won't fight." Gideon shook his head once, sharp and final. "No." She frowned faintly. as if she hadn't heard right. Her lips parted, but he didn't wait for more. "You don't owe me anything." She stared at him, her expression frozen, not just from the cold, but from confusion. The idea that someone would give her warmth and not take something for it seemed foreign. Impossible. He left her there and moved to the small chest at the far end of the cabin. Took the second blanket, pulled out dry socks and a boiled shirt, too big for her but better than what she had. He returned, set them beside her without touching her again. Then he knelt, built up the fire, stoked it until the heat reached their backs. She slowly pushed herself upright with effort. Her arms shook from the strain. Her legs wouldn't straighten, but she managed to sit. Gideon watched her face, eyes red and dry, jaw clenched, not crying, just enduring. She reached for the shirt first, pulled it on over the torn dress without removing anything. Her hands fumbled. He turned away. A minute later, he heard her whisper again. "Why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he ladled coffee from the pot into a tin cup and placed it on the floor in front of her. Then he sat on the far side of the fire, facing her, but saying nothing. She stared at the cup. After a moment, she picked it up, drank. Then her voice again, softer this time. "Thank you." He nodded once. Didn't speak. The storm outside howled again. Wind pushed at the walls. But inside, the cabin held. The fire burned. And for the first time in 5 winters, Gideon Hale wasn't alone. The storm lasted all night. It hammered the cabin roof in waves, pushing wind through the cracks in the walls and under the door, but the fire kept. Gideon had built it up with the driest logs he had, then sat by it long after she'd gone still. He didn't sleep, just sat in the corner chair, arms crossed, coat on, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the blanket. She didn't cry in her sleep, didn't make a sound, but her body flinched sometimes, slight jerks like she expected something to hit her. Once, around midnight, she woke suddenly with a gasp, reaching for her legs. When she realized she was covered, warm, untouched, she lay back down without a word. He didn't speak either. She slept on the floor, near the fire. He didn't offer the cot. That would have been too much, too close, too soon. Besides, he hadn't let anyone else use it in years. Around 2 in the morning, he rose and ladled more coffee into the tin cup, then drank it standing near the window, listening to the wind scrape snow against the far wall of the cabin. His horse was in the shed. The mule, too. He'd checked them earlier. They were quiet now. Everything was quiet except the storm and the sound of her breathing. She shifted under the blanket again. Her feet were still raw. He'd seen the cracks and scabs, dirt frozen into her skin. Her fingers, too, purpling at the tips. If she hadn't knocked, if she'd collapsed 10 feet farther from the door, she'd be a body by now. Gideon turned from the window, sat back in the chair, watched the fire, tried not to think. He never asked himself why he let her in. The answer was too simple and too heavy. He just knew he couldn't leave someone in the cold again. Not again. Morning light came slow and gray, filtering through the single window like ash. The wind had dropped, but the cold stayed thick. The world outside was white and still. Nothing moved. Inside, she stirred again. Her eyes opened. She looked at the fire, at the chair, at him. Then she sat up fast, too fast. The blanket fell, and she winced, covering her chest where the dress had slipped again at the torn neckline. Her hair was tangled over one shoulder. She clutched the blanket tighter and backed up slightly, breathing quick. Gideon didn't move. "You're safe," he said, quiet. She stared at him. Her lips were dry, cracked. Her fingers, even wrapped in cloth, still trembled. "You didn't." He shook his head once. "I didn't." She stared longer. Then something in her shoulders loosened. Not trust, but exhaustion. She pulled the blanket around her again and leaned back against the wall. He stood, moved to the stove, picked up the tin pot, and poured what was left of the beans into a small bowl. Warmed it over the coals without looking at her. "I got food," he said. "It ain't much, but it's hot." She didn't answer. When it was ready, he placed the bowl on the floor and stepped back, sitting across from her again. She waited a long time, then slowly reached forward. Her hands were stiff. She held the spoon awkwardly. She ate, small bites, eyes watching him between each one. He noticed that. She was trying to read him, like a cornered animal watching for signs of a trap. You Apache? He asked finally. She nodded once. Name? Silence. He didn't press. He let it sit there, quiet. She finished the food, set the bowl down. Then, after a pause, she spoke. Taya. He nodded. Didn't say his own name. Not yet. Just folded his arms again and leaned back in the chair. Where from? Her eyes dropped to the fire. She didn't answer right away. Then, north. 2 days walking. Maybe 3. No shoes. Lost count. Alone. She nodded again. Slower this time. He didn't ask more. The questions could wait. He leaned forward, picked up the bowl, rinsed it in the basin. She watched him do it. Quietly. The way he moved. The way he didn't ask for anything. She seemed unsure what to do with that. When he turned back around, she was trying to stand. He stepped forward quick, but she held up a hand. Managed to brace herself on the wall and get upright. Her knees wobbled. She reached for the edge of the table and held it with both hands. I need to go. He shook his head. You leave now, you freeze. She looked at the door, then back at him. You didn't touch me. Didn't take. You don't want me here. I didn't say that. She looked like she didn't believe him. He gestured to the fire. You stay till you can walk without falling over. I can go. You can barely stand. Her eyes flared, not in fear but pride. That hit him harder than it should have. She wasn't trying to escape. She was trying not to be a burden. I got room, he said gentler now. And I got water, beans. You don't owe me. She hesitated. Her fingers clutched the edge of the table harder. Then, finally, she lowered herself back down to the floor by the stove. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't leave. That was enough. He returned to his chair, stared at the fire again. They sat in silence. 2 strangers in the same room, watching flames they didn't start, trying to figure out if the world was ever going to give them peace. The second day was colder. The snow hadn't let up, not really, and a fresh layer had sealed the cabin door shut by morning. Gideon had to shove it open with his shoulder just to check the drift. It came up to mid-thigh, untouched and smooth. He didn't go far, just to the shed to check the mule, brush snow off the roof slope, and bring in another armload of wood. 20 minutes out, there left his hands raw, even with gloves on. Inside, the heat had faded. The fire had shrunk to orange coals, and the cold had crept in again from the corners of the room. Taya was awake, but hadn't moved from the blanket near the stove. She sat upright now, shoulders wrapped tight in the shirt he'd given her, eyes tracking him as he came through the door. She said nothing, but her posture had changed. Straighter, still guarded, but not as ready to run. He stomped the snow off his boots, dropped the wood beside the stove, and added 3 fresh logs. The fire crackled to life. Warmth climbed back into the air like something earned. She held her hands toward it. He noticed the swelling in her fingers, the split skin at the tips. The cloth she'd wrapped around them had bled through. He fetched clean strips from the crate near the cot, old undershirt pieces, boiled and dried, and knelt beside her, offering them. She tensed, unsure. I won't touch unless you want me to, he said. After a moment, she held her hands out, slowly, fingers shaking. He sat on the floor across from her and began unwinding the makeshift wraps. Her fingers were worse than he thought. Deep cracks, purple under the nails. He moved gently, silent, working in the firelight, aware of her eyes on him the whole time. He said nothing about the injuries. Just cleaned what he could with warm water, dried them, and rewrapped each one in clean cloth. She didn't flinch this time. When he finished, she lowered her hands into her lap and stared down at them for a long time. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded once and stood. She looked around the cabin now, like she was really seeing it for the first time. Her eyes passed over the cot, the hanging pans, the stacked tin plates, the hunting rifle on the wall. Her gaze stopped at the chair where his coat hung. You live here alone? She asked. 5 winters now. No woman. He shook his head. No. She didn't ask why, but her eyes lingered on him a second longer. Later that morning, he cooked cornmeal mush in the same tin pot, thickened it with dried beans. It wasn't much, but it filled the air with steam and made the place smell like something warmer than would smoke. He served her first again. She tried to take the bowl from him, but her fingers slipped. He caught it, then set it down in front of her on the floor. She muttered something in Apache. He didn't ask what. After a moment, she said it again, quieter. You give before you take. He didn't respond. "You don't eat until I eat," she added. "Habit," he said, voice flat. She studied him. He could feel it, but he didn't meet her eyes. Just ladled his own portion into another tin bowl and sat by the fire. They ate in silence. The quiet wasn't heavy. It was something else. New. Careful. Midday. She stood for the first time without wobbling. Walked 3 full paces. He didn't help. He didn't hover. Just stayed seated and watched. She stopped near the window, rested her hand on the sill, and looked out. "All white," she said. "Storm won't break for another day. You trapped in here, same as me." "Yep." She turned slightly, facing him. "Why do you live so far out?" He didn't answer right away. He rarely answered that question at all. But she was waiting. "No one to bury out here," he said finally. She didn't ask what he meant, just nodded once, like she understood it better than most people would. She took 2 more steps, then leaned her weight against the wall. "You're not like other white men," she said, not looking at him. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He didn't want praise. Didn't deserve it. He just didn't want to be what she'd run from. She turned toward him, arms crossed over her chest now, trying to hide the skin still showing through the rip in her dress. "I don't have another," she said. "Another what?" "Dress. Shoes. Nothing. They took everything." He nodded once. Not pity, just understanding. "I got a spare blanket," he said. "You could tie it up like a shawl, until we find something better." She hesitated. "Will you help me tie it?" He stood, went to the cot, grabbed the spare wool blanket, brought it to her, and held it up. She turned around, slowly, keeping her arms crossed. He wrapped it around her shoulders, then waited. She reached back with one hand and took the loose ends. His fingers brushed her back for a moment as he helped knot it loosely behind her neck. He stepped away fast. She turned, now wrapped fully. Her eyes didn't drop this time. They held his, and for the first time, there wasn't fear behind them, just tiredness and something like clarity. That night, he didn't take the cot again. He laid his bedroll on the floor across the room, near the rifle, and kept his coat on. She slept near the stove, her back to him, the blanket pulled up to her neck. The cabin was still. No words passed between them after dark. But she hadn't offered herself again, and he hadn't needed to say no. She knew now. She could stay and be safe. That was the first night they slept in the same room, not as strangers, but as people learning how not to be afraid of silence. The snow finally stopped sometime before dawn. Gideon knew it not by looking, but by the way the light shifted through the small window, softer, brighter, without the swirling shadow of flakes behind it. The wind had eased too, and for the first time in days, the silence outside matched the silence inside. He got up quietly. The fire had burned low, and his breath fogged in the air as he moved. Teo was still asleep, curled beneath the blanket near the stove. Her face was relaxed, not peaceful exactly, but not braced the way it had been before. She looked younger in sleep, less guarded. He didn't wake her. Instead, he stepped outside. The cold hit hard, but it was different now. Clean. Still. The land was buried in white, unbroken except for the slope of the roof and the dark square of the barn shed half sunk against the hill. His boots crunched through the drift as he made his way to the animals. The mule snorted when he opened the door. The horse, slower to react, lifted its head and blinked. He mucked the stall, broke the ice in the trough, fed both from the hayrack. Every motion was familiar, controlled, but his thoughts weren't on the feed or the weather. They stayed in the cabin, with the woman inside. When he came back in, she was awake, sitting cross-legged now, her back to the fire. She'd folded the blanket tighter around her body, the shirt still on underneath, and her hair was tied roughly with a scrap of leather string. Her eyes went to the door as he stepped in, but she didn't look startled this time. "Your horse sounds old," she said plainly. Gideon let the snow drop from his coat before shutting the door. "Older than the mule," he said, "but steadier." She nodded. "Mules are loud. Yours would be too, with snow that deep." That was the first time he made a joke. It landed quiet, but her lip twitched faintly. A half smile, or maybe just a shadow of one. He took off his gloves, set them on the stove, and began preparing breakfast, cornmeal again, with a pinch of salt this time. He didn't ask if she was hungry. He didn't need to. When it was ready, she moved to sit at the table without being asked. She didn't speak as he placed the bowl in front of her, just gave a small nod of thanks and began eating. Her movements were less stiff, more sure. After a few bites, she glanced around the cabin. You always live this way? This way? Alone? Quiet? No mess? He shrugged. No one to make mess for. She considered that. Not lonely? He thought for a moment, then said, no. She didn't believe him. He could tell. After they ate, she stood and walked the perimeter of the room slowly, testing her balance. When she reached the window, she wiped away the frost with her palm and stared out across the ridge. How far to town? Half day on horse. Longer on foot. You go often? Once a month. For supplies? He nodded. She turned back toward him. I want to help. He looked up from the pot he was cleaning. Help what? Work. Do something. You're still recovering. I have hands. He studied her. She wasn't offering now out of desperation. She was asserting something. A right to be part of the space she was occupying. He didn't argue. There's a basin behind the shed, he said. If we chip the ice, we can boil water. Wash what's still good. She stepped toward the door barefoot. Wait, he said. He went to the cot, dug through a crate beneath it, and pulled out an old pair of socks and the only spare boots he had, scuffed, cracked leather, several sizes too big. These won't fit. They'll do, she said. He helped her lace them. She didn't flinch when he touched her ankles this time. Her legs were scraped, red from frost, but healing. Outside, the sky had cleared. Blue stretched overhead in a wide, pale sweep, broken only by the line of distant pines and the dull silver of frozen brush peeking through snow. The air was bitter but still, breathable. She moved slow through the snow. He stayed near, not hovering, but close enough in case she stumbled. At the basin, he broke the ice with a rusted axe head and dipped the buckets. She carried one back inside without being asked, set on the stove to boil. Then she pulled the torn dress from the floor and began to clean it. He didn't speak, just watched. She worked with focus, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. Every stitch she pulled loose, every bead she set aside. None of it looked random. She was restoring something, not because she thought he expected it, but because it mattered to her. He understood that. Later, she stood at the table, steam rising from the cloth in her hands, and asked without looking at him, "Do you have a needle?" He brought her the small tin he kept near the rifle oil. She took it, carefully threaded a length of dark sinew, and began sewing. He watched from the chair, arms crossed. "You do that well," he said. "My mother made me learn," she replied. She said if I had nothing else, I should know how to fix what's mine. He nodded. "That's a good lesson." She looked up at him briefly. Most men I've met didn't think so. He didn't respond. Didn't need to. By nightfall, the repaired dress was hanging dry on a line across the room. The cabin smelled like warm leather and boiled water and wood smoke. She handed the boots back to him. "Keep them," he said. "They're yours. I got another pair." She paused, then said, "Thank you." He nodded. They sat at the table that night. 2 bowls, 2 spoons. No talking, but something easier than silence. Not comfort exactly, but permission. Before bed, she folded the blanket herself. Didn't wait for him to help. Laid it near the fire again. Then turned to him. "Good night," she said. It was the first night she spoke the last word. He stood beside his bedroll, nodded once. "Good night, Taya." And for the first time in years, Gideon Hale said someone's name aloud, and it didn't hurt to say it. By the 4th morning, their movements had found a rhythm. Gideon rose first, stoked the stove, fed the mule and horse. Taya stayed inside and waited until the air warmed, then boiled water and set their 2 bowls at the table without a word. She no longer asked if she could help. She simply moved through the space as if she had the right to be there. And she did. When he returned, she was pouring water into the basin. Her sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hands were still wrapped in cloth, but she moved with more ease. Less guarded. Her hair had been brushed back and tied into a single braid that hung loose down her back, strands still damp from washing. "Snow's easing off," he said, pulling off his gloves. "Might thaw enough for town in 2 days." She gave a small nod. "You go then. I need coffee. Powder. Maybe flour. You go alone. I always do." This time, she didn't look away when she asked, "You want me gone by then?" The question hit like a split fence post in frost. Straight. Inevitable. No way to work around it. He hung his coat without answering. She turned back to the basin and dipped a cloth in the water, squeezing it out slowly. Her arms were tense. She didn't push the question again, but it stayed there, hanging in the room like the smell of snow-damp wood. Gideon finally answered. You can stay as long as you want. She stilled, her hands in the water, her back still turned. Even after I get strong? He nodded. Yes. Silence. Then she murmured, no one's ever said that to me before. He didn't know how to answer, so he didn't. Later that afternoon, the clouds broke. The blue sky opened wide over the ridge, and sun spilled across the snow like sheets of glass. They stood outside together for the first time, she wrapped in the patch blanket, him holding the kettle he'd brought out to melt snow. He glanced at her once as she stared at the horizon. What do you see out there? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, she said, I'm looking for something that doesn't want to hurt me. He didn't press. When they went back inside, she paused just past the door, fingers brushing the wood grain where it met the wall. Then she turned and looked at him. You have a wife once? He didn't flinch, but he didn't hide the weight behind his answer either. Yes. She waited. She died before the war ended. Fever. We didn't have medicine. Or time. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes shifted. Something softened. You love her still? I think about her, he said, but I don't expect her to come back. That's different than loving a ghost. Taya stepped closer, slowly. She wasn't nervous, just deliberate. Did you bury her here? No, in Texas, before I came out this way. He expected her to leave it there. Instead, she asked, You came here to forget? He looked at her. No, I came here to stop having to explain. She seemed to understand that. She didn't speak for a long time after. But when they sat down to eat again that evening, something shifted. She sat closer. She didn't wait for him to start eating. And when he poured the coffee afterward, her hand reached across the table. It wasn't to take the tin cup. She placed her hand lightly on his. Her fingers small, bandaged but warm. He froze. She didn't pull away. He didn't move. Her voice was barely above a breath. You don't touch unless I let you. No, he said. She nodded, eyes never leaving his. This time, I let you. He didn't grab her, didn't lean in. He just turned his palm upward under hers, letting their hands rest together on the table between them. It was the first contact, not born of injury, offering, or fear. Just choice. When she finally stood, she didn't say goodnight. She didn't have to. He watched her walk to the stove, lay out the bedroll, and settle in. She didn't glance back, but he knew. Without question, she felt safe now. And, maybe for the first time in years, so did he. The wind had died completely. For the first time in nearly a week, the land outside was still. No flurries, no whistling through the cracks. Just quiet, the kind that filled the room when no one needed to speak. The fire was burning steady, low even, not roaring, not dim. It cast a warm orange light against the cabin walls and made the shadows move slowly, like they were alive but unhurried. Gideon sat in his usual chair, one boot resting across his other knee, eyes half-lidded, watching the flames. Taya was seated closer to the stove, her legs folded beneath her, wrapped in the now-clean, re-sewn deerskin dress and the gray blanket tied across her shoulders. She had just finished brushing out her hair, slow, even strokes from scalp to tip, and had laid the comb across the table. She hadn't asked permission. She didn't need to. The rhythm of the past 4 days had built something neither of them named, but both respected. There were spaces in the cabin that were hers now, by the stove, at the table, in the doorway when she stepped out to breathe. And Gideon didn't crowd them. He didn't ask what she'd been through before. He didn't have to. Sometimes pain didn't need to be dug up. It was written in how someone stepped into a room, or how they flinched when a shadow moved, or how they refused to sleep with their back turned to a wall. Taya didn't flinch anymore. And tonight, for the first time, she turned away from the fire, not toward her bedroll, but toward him. She stood slowly. No theatrics, no dramatic look in her eyes, just a firm, silent decision. He watched her come across the room, each step deliberate. She stopped in front of him, close enough he could see the red on her knuckles, the faint pink from old burns on her wrist. She didn't say anything, just knelt in front of him, resting her hands on her thighs. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. His breath was steady, but his chest felt tight. Not from fear, not from guilt, just the weight of something real settling in. "You don't owe me anything," he said, voice low. "I know," she said. "You don't have to do this." "I'm not doing anything," she said, and there was no edge to her voice. "I'm just sitting here." He nodded once. She shifted, reaching to lift his hand. She held it between both of hers, gently rubbing her thumbs over the ridges in his palm. His hand was rough, the scars thick from years of rope and steel. She didn't pull away from that. "You were in a war," she said softly. He nodded again. She touched the scar on his jaw with one hand, just barely. A slow brush, then pulled back. "I was too," she added. He looked at her now, fully. Their eyes met, and for the first time since she'd stepped through his door, the silence between them wasn't about fear or uncertainty or waiting for the other to speak. It was about understanding, about choosing to remain present, without filling the air with anything that might break it. She rested her head gently against his knee. He didn't move. His hand hovered over her hair for a long second, then slowly lowered. He let it rest there, no pressure, no demand, just presence. She closed her eyes. The fire cracked. Outside, the snow glowed faint blue under the moonlight. Inside, they stayed like that. A woman who had walked through fire and a man who had buried too many ghosts. Not touching in desperation, not reaching in fear, just breathing the same air by the same fire in the same room and staying. The morning came without warning. No sunrise through the window, just a gradual brightening of the white outside, as if the world had been turned up one notch. The sky stayed pale and flat, pressed low over the land, and the snow reflected every inch of it like a mirror that wouldn't blink. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to coals. Gideon was already up, boots on, coat half-buttoned, rifle in hand. He hadn't said anything yet, hadn't even looked at her, but something in the way he moved, in the tightness of his shoulders, told Taya something was wrong. She sat up slowly on the bedroll, clutching the blanket around her. "What is it?" He didn't answer at first, just stood at the door, one hand on the bolt. Then footprints. That was all he said. She stood fast, the cold forgotten. "How many?" "Two," he said, voice calm but clipped. Could be riders who came up and turned back. Could be they circled around. Don't know. She stepped up beside him, barefoot, but didn't flinch at the cold underfoot. She looked out through the narrow crack in the wall near the stove, just enough to see the slope of snow leading toward the edge of the ridge. Nothing moved. "Do they know you're here?" she asked. "Maybe. Maybe not." He turned toward her now, eyes meeting hers with steady clarity. "You ever handle a rifle?" She nodded once. "Better with a bow, but I can shoot." He handed her his sidearm from the shelf. Heavy, well-worn, the leather grip smooth from years of use. He didn't explain how to use it, just passed it to her, and she accepted it without hesitation. He pointed to the crate near the table. "Shells are inside if it comes to that. You stay low. What about you?" "I'm going to track out 20 paces. Get a read on direction." She paused. "You sure?" "No, but I need to know." He stepped out, closing the door behind him with slow care. Taya moved quickly. She loaded the sidearm, slower than she would have with a bow, but her fingers were steady. She checked the chamber twice. Then she crouched low by the stove, eyes fixed on the door, pulse loud in her ears. Every creak of the wind, every groan of the beams. They all felt sharper now. Time passed slow. She counted each breath. Then, footsteps. Coming back. She raised the pistol, aimed, held it steady. The door opened. Gideon stepped in. She lowered the gun before he even said a word. "Boot tracks head south," he said. "No horse prints. Just feet. Deep ones. Could mean they're on foot, but heavy. Men. Armed, most likely. Looking for me?" she asked. Could be. Could be anyone out here. But the trail's fresh." They came close. She didn't ask him what he wanted to do. She didn't need to. "I'll start packing supplies," she said instead. He didn't argue. He just walked over, picked up the blanket near her bedroll, and handed it to her. "We leave by midday. Take the ridge path north. There's cover there." She nodded. He hesitated, just for a second, then reached and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You okay?" She turned to him, eyes steady. "I'm tired of running, but I'll follow you if you lead." That stayed with him longer than he wanted to admit. By the time noon came, the sun had broken through the clouds. The air warmed just enough to soften the snow's top layer. They left footprints now, a line of them leading away from the cabin, toward the high pass where the scrub brush grew thicker and the wind couldn't see you coming. They didn't talk much, but when they walked side by side, neither one looked back. And that mattered more than anything else. The ridge trail wasn't a path so much as a break in the brush, an old game trail that climbed steep and wound between clusters of rock and pine. Snow clung to the shaded sides, but the sun had warmed the ridge crest just enough to make it passable. Their boots crunched through patches of icy dirt and soft powder, the only sounds the rhythm of footfalls and breath. Gideon moved ahead, rifle in hand, eyes sharp on the trail. Taya followed close behind, the pistol tucked into the folds of her blanket, both hands steady. She didn't complain, didn't slow down, even when the climb made her legs burn. The cold didn't bother them now, not like it had before. What lingered wasn't the temperature, it was the feeling of being watched. Once, when they rounded a switchback, Taya stopped short. "There," she whispered, pointing to the ridge below. Gideon turned, scanned the slope with practiced eyes. Boot tracks, deep, wide, less than 2 hours old. "They circled," he said quietly. "Didn't follow. Just wanted to see if the place was occupied. Did they see us leave? Don't think so, but they're still nearby." They kept moving. By late afternoon, clouds had returned, and the light began to fade fast. Gideon led them toward a spot he remembered from years earlier, a half-collapsed hunting shelter built into the north side of a rock face. It wasn't much, 3 timber posts, a beam roof, and a wall of packed brush behind it. But it blocked the wind, and with firewood and cover it would do. When they reached it, Taya stepped inside first. It was dry, cold but dry. She set her pack down, only a blanket, a biscuit wrapped in cloth, the revolver, and turned toward him. "This'll hold for tonight?" He nodded. "We'll stay till sunrise, then cut down toward the creek trail. That'll take us west, away from the cabin." She crouched and began clearing space for a fire. He didn't stop her. Instead, he gathered pine from beneath the trees, the driest sticks he could find. His hands moved fast, efficient, every motion a product of years living this way. She struck the flint herself. Took 3 tries. Then a spark caught, and the fire grew, faint but alive. They didn't speak much as they worked, but every look meant something now. He laid his coat beside her so she could sit without freezing through. She accepted it, and after they both ate, silently, sharing the last of the dried meat and a strip of hard biscuit, she reached forward and added another log to the fire. The flames rose, casting light against the stone wall behind them. It was the only glow in miles. Gideon sat across from her, back against the rock, rifle by his leg. "Do you think they'll follow?" she asked. "Hard to say. If they come, will you fight?" He met her eyes. "Only if I have to." She nodded, pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I used to think killing was something that changed you, but I think being hunted changes you worse." He didn't disagree. She looked at him again, not afraid, just tired. "I don't want to keep running," she said. "You don't have to. Not with me." They were quiet a long while after that. Then, without asking, she crossed the space between them, sat beside him, not touching, just close enough that her knee brushed his. He didn't move away. Her hands were cold. She tucked them under the blanket and leaned just slightly into him. "You still don't touch unless I ask?" she whispered. "I don't. Then I'm asking." He turned his head toward her. Slowly, carefully, he slid his arm around her shoulders, resting it over the blanket. She leaned into the curve of him, her body soft against his side, the firelight warming her face. Neither spoke. There was no kiss, no fever grab, just the shared silence of 2 people who had survived long enough to stop fighting the quiet. Outside, the ridge stayed still. Snow fell again, but lighter this time. The fire crackled. The cold stayed on the other side of the rock wall. And for the first night since they'd left the cabin, they slept not just beside each other, but together. Because they wanted to. They woke before the sky turned. Taya stirred first. She hadn't moved much in the night. Her head had rested against Gideon's chest, and now that same chest rose and fell beneath her cheek, steady and slow. His arm was still around her shoulders, protective but not possessive. When she shifted, he opened his eyes but didn't speak. The fire had burned low, just a red core surrounded by ash. The cold pressed in at the edges of the shelter again, but neither of them reached for warmth right away. They sat up together, wordless. Then she spoke softly. "Do you still want to keep moving?" He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Thought, I don't want to bring trouble to that cabin, but we can't keep running either." She nodded, staring at the embers. "I've been running since I was 16. I don't even remember what it feels like to plant something and stay long enough to watch it grow." He looked over at her, the curve of her face lit soft by what was left of the fire. "We could try," he said. Her eyes turned toward him. "You do that? Start again somewhere else?" "Not alone," he said. That answer landed heavy between them. Not as burden, as promise. They broke camp just after first light, packed the blanket, doused the fire, smoothed out the snow to cover any sign they'd stayed. Gideon scanned the trail below with the long view he'd trained for in the army. He saw no fresh movement, no broken branches, no disturbed snow. They cut west along the old creek trail, the one he used to ride for trapping before winter set in. It led through low trees and shallow rock passes, terrain hard to follow, harder to track. Perfect for starting over. Taya walked beside him, not behind. Her feet still ached, and she limped slightly on her left side where frostbite had bruised the toes, but she never asked to stop. Around midday, they paused in a small clearing by the frozen creek. Gideon knelt to check the water beneath the ice. Taya stood watch, her eyes trained toward the far slope. That's when they heard it. Distant, not close enough to see, but close enough to feel in the chest. A voice. Two men. Talking low. Not Apache. English. She crouched. He moved to cover behind a pine, motioning for her to stay low. His rifle came up, but he didn't lift it to his shoulder. He listened. Then the voices drifted off. Faint. Moving south, away from the direction they were heading. Taya looked at him. Could be bounty hunters. Could be, he said. But they're not tracking. Didn't stop. Didn't cut sign. She waited. Then he said, "We keep going." They didn't speak again until they reached the bluff. Below them lay a long flat stretch of unclaimed land. Dry brush, rocky soil, and a grove of cedar trees halfway down. Gideon stopped at the edge of the overlook and stood still. "This could work," he said. Taya stepped beside him, eyes scanning the land. Water nearby, 3 miles west. Spring-fed. Soil's hard, but it'll break if we work it. Enough space for a cabin. More than enough. She let out a long breath. Not relief. Something closer to resolve. "Then let's build something," she said. He turned to her. "You sure?" She nodded. "You said not alone." "I meant it." She stepped in close, lifted her hand to his cheek. Fingers warm despite the wind. He leaned forward slightly, forehead against hers. Then she kissed him. Slow, not desperate, not asking for anything. Just a kiss that said, "I'm still here." When they pulled apart, she smiled faintly. Her first real smile. He reached in his coat and pulled out a folded piece of leather, an old pouch he kept for flint and scraps. From it, he took out a small wood-handled knife. He turned and carved a line in the bark of the cedar tree beside them. Then another. Then 4 more. "What are you doing?" she asked, tilting her head. "Marking the first day," he said. "If we're going to stay, we need to start counting." Taya stepped beside him and added a mark of her own beneath his. Smaller, slanted, but there. 1 start. 2 people. No one chasing them. Just snow, earth, and sky stretching out in all directions, and room to begin again. The land hadn't gotten any warmer, but it had gotten familiar. In the weeks since they marked that cedar tree, the sky had shifted, the creek had thawed, and the hard ground had given way just enough for post holes and shovel work. The soil wasn't kind, but neither were they. Not anymore. They'd both learned how to make things last with hands that didn't stop, even when they shook from cold or ache. The cabin went up slowly, 1 wall at a time. Gideon cut and set every beam. Taya hauled rocks from the ridge to form a foundation ring. No fancy plans, no blueprints, just what he remembered from before and what she suggested from watching her father build with nothing but rope and mud when she was a girl. There was no talk of leaving, no talk of what came before, only what was needed now: timber, water, food, and each other. Inside the half-built cabin, the stove from his old place stood in the center. They'd hauled it across the valley in parts on a sledge, Taya guiding the mule, while Gideon pushed from behind. It took a full day and 2 bloody knuckles, but now it burned hot again, anchoring the space like it had always belonged. Taya had made curtains from her old deerskin dress. She didn't explain why, just said it shouldn't be worn anymore, but it shouldn't be buried either. She hung them with twine across the one window Gideon had carved into the north wall. There were 2 cups on the shelf now, 2 spoons, 2 blankets folded at the edge of the cot they shared. Not because they had to, because they chose to. One morning, Gideon came in from checking the trapline to find Taya crouched by the stove, brushing out her hair in the firelight. Her braid was longer now, thicker. Her skin had healed. No more cracks at her fingers. No more bruises on her thighs. She looked up when he stepped in. Her lips pulled into a small smile. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing to his hand. He glanced down. A fresh nick from the wire snare. Not deep. She rose and walked over, took his hand without asking, sat him on the stool, dipped a rag in warm water, and cleaned it slowly. He watched her face the whole time, the slope of her cheeks, the way her mouth pressed in concentration. The small scar now faded on her jaw. When she finished, she didn't let go of his hand. "You think they'll ever come back?" she asked. "Maybe. You worry?" He looked at her, at the calm in her voice, not fear. "No." She leaned forward then and kissed him again, slower this time, deeper. Not a kiss of survival, not a kiss of thanks. A kiss that said we stayed. That night, they sat on the cabin's front step, unfinished though it was, with a blanket around their shoulders and her bare feet tucked against his leg. The stars were clear. The moon was low. The land was quiet except for the rustle of the trees behind them and the faint creak of the roof settling into place. Taya pointed at the sky. "My mother used to tell me each star was a story, not just light, something that was lived." Gideon watched her profile in the dark. "You ever tell one of those stories?" he asked. "I'm living mine now," she said. He reached over and took her hand. She didn't pull away. And when they stood and stepped back inside that night, closing the door against the cold, there was no doubt left. Not about the cabin, not about the land, not about them. They hadn't built a new life quickly. They had built it right. One log, one fire, one choice at a time, and they stayed together.